The reason I chose Emory over any other hospital in Atlanta was I felt that Emory had technological advancements that the other hospitals didn't have. Also, with their collaboration of their doctors and the several different campuses that we have, it gives you opportunities that one campus might not be able to help you out, but we can send you to another campus.
Our physicians, our provider, they're approachable. Any problems, you're able to go ahead and tell them. They listen to you. They're not just like dictating what should go on. We're part of a team.
Emory knew my purpose before I did. And I think the reason I chose to stay is because I've always had a sense of belonging and I've been able to grow professionally and personally.
I just kept feeling seen and respected. I liked my bosses and my community, the teamwork. And ultimately that was the reason why I decided to sign on as a nurse and start my nursing career with Emory.
This is like home away from home for me. The staffs are friendly, patient safety is a priority, and staff needs are met as much as possible, and the environment is very, very friendly. And I love what I do here.
Emory is a family, and I chose it to be my partner for life. And everyone is just ready to lend a hand. They're always there. Even if you don't ask for it, they see you and they're always there behind me. Everyone in my team, they're very supportive.
Why wouldn't we want to work at the best? I know I'm the best nurse, so I want to work at the best hospital. We represent everyone from everywhere. Our patients are so comfortable and see themselves in us, as well as we have shared governance. My voice matters, and I have a big voice, and I love to use it.
Hi, I'm Victoria Jordan, and I'm the Vice President of Process Optimization and Innovation for Emory Healthcare. I'm joined today by Dontavius Gaston. Dontavius is our Healthcare Systems Engineer, also at Emory Healthcare. We're excited to share with you today a project that we worked on jointly with the Georgia Tech Industrial and Systems Engineering Senior Design, and it was to develop a simulation model for our Dunwoody Family Medicine Clinic. Emory Healthcare is part of Emory University. We're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have facilities across the state. We're the only academic medical center in the state of Georgia. We have 10 hospitals. We've been ranked #1, including hospitals that are #1 and #2 in the state. We have over 580 locations, and of those, 230 are primary care facilities. For this project, we focused on our resident-staffed Dunwoody Family Medicine Clinic. That clinic includes primary care, family medicine, orthopedics, spine, and cardiology, as well as imaging. We have a lab there, and we also do ambulatory and outpatient surgery and physical therapy. So it's a comprehensive clinic with over 60,000 square feet and 86 clinical rooms and even more facilities that we have the capacity there to see over 350,000 patients a year.
As Dr. Jordan mentioned, we partnered with our Dunwoody Family Medicine Clinic. This allowed us to introduce simulation to our providers and to our clinical staff. We chose Dunwoody because we saw the opportunity to increase efficiency within our processes. But our main goal for this clinic is to help our residents complete their requirements for their residency programs within their 3-year time frame. This clinic is in a newer building, which consists of 33 rooms. We have 2 to 3 preceptors every day. We have 10 providers, 3 to 4 nurses, and 5 to 7 medical students. Something that's unique to this clinic is that it is a resident-driven clinic. So 71% of our providers are residents.
So through this project, the Georgia Tech team, along with Dontavius's facilitation support, did a great job of getting an initial digital twin in Simio. It gave us a solid preliminary model upon which we will build. We were able to identify, or the team was able to identify some opportunities to enhance flow and efficiency that our primary care team was really excited about. They gave us very positive feedback. They said it really helped to have some fresh eyes look at the process and identify things that in hindsight seemed very obvious, but when you are in the clinic every day doing the work, you don't really see that. So they were very excited about the possibility of implementing some of the recommendations from the team. Our next steps will be to take this Semio model, update it using the healthcare graphics so that we actually see nurses and physicians and equipment in the presentation. Then conduct some additional what-if analysis on some of the other recommendations that they made and implement those as we are able to. Phase 2 for us, and we've put in a request for another Georgia Tech team to work with us. We're hoping that will go forward for the fall semester. So phase 2 will be to optimize scheduling for the residents and patients so that we can make sure all our residents complete all the procedures on their checklist. So next step will be the optimization model. And we want to specifically thank Semio for the work that they did to help us get this going. Greer and her team helped us make sure that we had a consistent system between the software that we were using internally and the software that the students were using. And they also helped us with education and consulting support that was invaluable in our efforts.
We would like to give a special thanks to all of our Emory Healthcare staff that made this possible. First, to our executives that gave us the opportunity to do the simulation project within the clinic. Second, to our clinical staff that provided invaluable information to our students and allowing them to come into the facility to understand the processes and being open-minded to change. I also want to give a big thanks to Sydney, our data analyst, who pulled mountains and mountains of data for us in order to make sure that this simulation was accurate and we were able to validate it. Thank you to our Georgia Tech students who came in to understand our processes, spend time with our clinical staff, and to provide a valuable solution for us to drive change within our facility. And thank you, Dr. Julian, for advising the students. We saw them grow and mature throughout the semester. We look forward to partnering with you in the future and continuing on this simulation journey. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Emory. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. We're Team 29 with Georgia Tech, and we're really excited to share with you our final deliverable for our capstone project. This project was a culmination of all the work that we've been doing in the last couple of months. And so our client is the Emory Dunwoody Clinic. It's a newly established facility that opened in October of 2024. This facility represents a significant upgrade from its previous location, expanding from 25 to 35 exam rooms. And so that helps with the accommodate with the growing patient demand. And so on the left side of the screen here, you'll see a map of the floor plan of the clinic, and you'll see that it's divided into 4 distinct pods. So each pod consists of about 7 to 10 exam rooms, which are staffed by up to 1 to 4 providers and 1 to 4 nurses. Another really important aspect of the clinic system is the preceptor space. And so a preceptor is a licensed medical doctor that is responsible for overseeing the supervision of residents. And a resident is a medical student that has finished their medical schooling, but is now undergoing the real life experience. I'm sorry about the cat in the back. But why is this important? Well, the family medicine clinic is a resident-driven clinic. In fact, over 70% of the providers within the clinic are residents themselves. And so it's really important that within the system that we're able to establish a strong connection between the residents and providers, especially considering this year in 2025, they're projected to see over 20,000 patients. And so one of the ways that Emory helps establish a strong connection between their residents and the preceptor is they have a requirement where the resident has to meet with the preceptor to discuss their patients. And so Emory does this for a couple of reasons. The main reason, though, is to ensure that all the patients that are coming through the Dunwoody Clinic are getting the proper care and to ensure that. And so this interaction largely depends on how far along the resident is in their residency itself. And so, for example, a resident in their first 6 months, this is a resident that just came into the clinic, they're required to meet the preceptor in the middle of their patient appointment. And so you can imagine a resident just finished servicing their patient. They go to the preceptor's office in the middle of the appointment, and then the preceptor comes back with the resident to ensure that all the proper care has been administered. As residents get more and more experience, they have a little bit more flexibility. And so in the second 6 months of their first year, the preceptor no longer has to come back to the exam room, but the resident still has to go in the middle of the appointment to ensure that all the care is being done. Starting their second year, residents are now have the opportunity to start stacking their patients. And stacking is essentially a concept where the residents are able to see multiple patients consecutively before they actually have to visit the preceptor's office. And then we'll see that flexibility increase as in the third year, they can stack up to 3 to 4 patients. And then also, it's important to note that as residents get more experience, they're also getting more appointments per session. And so all this is important because it all maps back out to the process mapping of the patient. And it's strongly dependent on who the provider is, more specifically, how far along that, like how much experience that provider has. And so the first 3 steps of any appointment, we call this the pre-provider process, is same for anyone. So if anyone's been to a doctor's office, you know this process very well. You go, you check in, maybe fill out any paperwork. The nurse comes and rooms you, and then the nurse does any pre-diagnostics, taking your vitals, whatever they need to do to service you, and then they leave. Where the deviations start to occur is depends on how far along a resident is or how much experience the provider has. And so the most simplistic process mapping is for faculty, and so these are just medical doctors within the facility themselves, and they have it very straightforward. They enter the room, service the patient, leave the room. If they find any need to administer additional care, they'll tell the nurse that is mapped to that patient to do so, and then the visit will end. Going into the resident that's stacking, so these are primarily for our second and third years, it's a very similar process, but at the end of the process, if they've reached their stacking, their max stacking constraint, then they would leave for the preceptor queue and meet with the preceptor. And then finally, the resident that's not stacking, this is just our first years, will note that they're meeting the preceptor in the middle of their appointment and everything else stays relatively similar.
And so we can see there's a lot of different processes occurring at this clinic that aren't, happening at a traditional clinic because this is a teaching clinic. And one of the results of that is that patient wait times are high within the system, especially as you can see, there's a lot of appointments that the clinic is serving. And so we can see that these wait times are throughout the different processes of a patient's appointment. So we can see 40% of patients are waiting longer than 10 minutes just to get roomed at the beginning of their appointment. And then if we go to next slide here, about 50% of patients are also waiting longer than 10 minutes after their nurse leaves for that physician to arrive. So that's 2 different places where patients are waiting. About half of the time of their total wait is occurring at each different spot. And overall, patients are waiting an average of 34 minutes within an appointment. And so there's a lot of different sources for this wait time, right? So we mentioned the preceptor constraints are forcing providers aren't always able to service a patient, right? So you might have a provider might have a patient waiting in the exam room, but they're unable to service them because they have to go meet with the preceptor before they can service that patient. And there might be a line at the preceptor because there's other providers or other residents waiting to see the preceptor. And so that can cause delays. We saw system backlog. So what we noticed, and this is something the clinical staff has mentioned, is at the beginning of the day, obviously there's very little wait times. And as the session progresses towards the middle of the day, the end of the morning session, and at the end of the day, at the end of the afternoon session, appointments start later and later and end later and later. And so that system backlog develops. And then, of course, there's also other sources of delay, like patients arriving late that we can't really control as standardized of a way. And so we can kind of see that visit starting late and ending later as we track each stage of the appointment. So the way the clinic operates is we expect patients to arrive 15 minutes before their scheduled appointment time. So if a patient has a 1 o'clock appointment time, they are expected to arrive by 12:45 so that they can see the nurse at 12:45, get roomed at 12:45, and then the nurse can leave the room at 1 o'clock so that the provider is ready to enter the room, service the patient right at 1 o'clock. What we notice is right from the start, 61% of patients are arriving less than 15 minutes before their appointment time, and 19% arriving after the appointment time itself. And If we look at rooming, which is supposed to be complete by the appointment start, 77% of the time it's not complete by the appointment start. By the time the provider enters, we saw there's that nurse to provider wait time. 93% of the time, the provider is entering after the scheduled appointment start time. And at the end of the day, 90% of appointments are ending later than projected. And so we can see there's a lot of different sources for delay. They all interact with one another. We saw the providers are meeting with preceptors, the providers are meeting with patients, nurses are meeting with patients. There's all these different moving parts. And I think we determined this is a great use case for a simulation-based approach that Dr. Jordan and the Emory Clinic is looking for. And so that was kind of our approach to solving this problem and really more long-term future problems in the clinic.
Absolutely. And so now that we identified our problem, now actually getting into actually collecting the data that's necessary for it. And so we're really fortunate that Emory has a very large database of data, their electronic health record. That record has a lot of data pertaining to the patient's flow within the data. So we have from when the patient checks in to when rooming begins, how long the nurse service is, and then we also have towards the end of the appointment where when they visit, when the visit ends and when they check out. What we don't have within the electronic health data is non-patient facing data. And so that primarily means the preceptor data. So we don't have the time, how long the provider is at the preceptor, how long they're waiting in the queues. And so our solution to help find this data was we conducted a time study. And so every day, every other day or so, we would send our team to the clinic to collect data on what actually is occurring at this preceptor. And so ultimately, all this data helped us begin our data analysis. And so our primary goal was to find what factors are most influential at every step of the process map. And so we'll look here that for provider service time, one of the most important factors was the provider experience, like how far along their residency or how much experience the provider has. And we'll see that there's a clear trend that less experienced providers take longer to treat patients. And so this would be something that would be important to actually model within our distributions when we actually input them into Simio itself. And so we did this with every single step of the process map. We segmented our patient attributes on the most significant characteristics. And so we started this with the first process step was the relative arrival time. And so this is when the patient actually arrives relative to their scheduled appointment time. And we found that the two main significant characteristics was age group and the hour of appointment. Apply the same process for the nurse service time. And we found that age group, sex, and appointment type were the most important. And then finally, we found that provider service time, which we showed already provider experience had a clear trend, but appointment types also had a significant characteristic. And so we were able to be very granular within our distributions to be as specific as possible when we're actually going into creating our models. But what you'll notice here is the granularity is a little bit too specific. For nurse service times, for instance, we have 248 distributions of which each distribution might be prone to overfitting, or we might not have enough data points for each distribution. And so one of our solutions to alleviate this is we conducted a correlational analysis to cluster similar attributes together and ultimately also help reduce the dimensionality of our model and make it a little bit more simpler. And so we did this for every part of the process. We'll start with relative arrival rate. Of the 9 hours of the day, we actually found that we could cluster them into 3 main hours. And I'll get into a little bit of that in a second here. We did the same process for nurse service time and provider service time, specifically the appointment types, and we found that we were able to cluster a lot of the similar appointments together. And so whether it be online appointments generally follow the same trend, women's health appointments generally follow the same trend. And so going back to the relative arrival rates, we actually found that the only significant times of that there's a different distribution of patients coming to the clinic are at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. So these are the first appointments of each shift, the morning shift and the afternoon shift. Every other time throughout the day actually followed a very similar distribution. And so it didn't matter if a patient was arriving at 3 p.m. or 10 a.m., they had a very similar distribution. And so applying that same process to nurse service time and provider service time, we found that we were able to cluster a lot of the similar ones together. So like I said, we were able to cluster in women's health appointments together, cluster online appointments, Medicare appointments, and ultimately, like I mentioned, the ability to actually cluster these appointments together and reduce the dimensionality makes it a lot easier. So that way, when we actually input these distributions into the simulation, we'll have a more accurate representation of the clinic.
Yeah, and here we have a quick demonstration of the simulation in action. Hopefully we can get it to load. I know the embedding's a little weird.
Let me just, oh, sorry.
You're good.
Oh, I forgot to enable the content. That's why. Should be good now. There we go.
Oh, can you reshare your screen? Perfect. Cool. Yeah, so this was actually, I think we're simulating the March 3rd morning session here. And so we inputted that schedule into our simulation. We can see the clinic operating. So we have patients arriving at the top, they're checking in, and they're waiting at the top in the waiting area until a nurse can room them. They get picked up by a nurse from the waiting area and escorted to their room. The nurse is able to service them and then go back to their pod workspace or to treat another patient. And then the patient will wait in their exam room for a provider to arrive. And then we can see some providers have to move over to the top right to see a preceptor. And so we tried to model the clinic visually as best as possible just to make this as useful as possible. And then one other thing we built here was this data preprocessor. And so what this allows us to do is to take the schedule for a day, so the actual patients that were scheduled for a past date. And if you can play the video here, we can select a date and just change the date in this preprocessing tool, run the script, and it'll output two CSVs, one for the patient schedule for that day or for that session, and one for the providers and the nurses who are on duty. And actually just automatically, you can just import that into Simio by rebinding this table. And now you can simulate that exact session in the simulation. So for example, if the clinic knew Friday morning, there's a lot of patients coming in. We kind of want to be a little prepared. Where might we see delays? Where might we need to, have more people on duty and to counter there being a lot of patients? They can run the simulation and kind of visually be able to see that happening. And then quantitatively, we also implemented these tally state variables in the simulation in Simio. And so this basically tracks for every patient entering the clinic in the simulation. When are they arriving? When are they arriving, for example, that relative arrival time? When are they arriving relative to their scheduled appointment time? How much time are they spending waiting at the waiting area to get roomed? How much time does it take a nurse to service them? How much time do they wait for the provider, and so on? And also those times relative to what they're estimated to be in the system. So if an appointment is estimated to take 20 minutes, how long does the appointment actually take in the simulation relative to that? And so these are valuable because if you could go back, these are valuable because one, you can actually, when you simulate a certain day, we can track each patient and kind of follow how they moved at each time throughout the clinic, but also so we can actually validate the simulation. And so we were able to ensure some face validity of our simulation. So we had, I guess, 3 steps to ensure face validity. One was visually looking at our simulation, making sure the logic in the clinic is operating, or in the simulation is operating as it does in the clinic. So when a first-year provider treats a patient, they are going to the preceptor in the middle of their visit, and that's happening in the simulation, right? When a second-year provider has seen 3 patients in a row, they are required to go to the preceptor, and so on. So we saw that happening. The second step in our face validity was ensuring that our input models were relatively accurate. So one of those was, for example, was the average nurse service time. So this is something that we modeled with those patient attributes that we found earlier. So appointment type, the sex of the patient, and the age group. And so these are things that we modeled and input into the simulation based on historical data. So that was data from October to January. And then we tested our simulation on new data that we'd never seen before from the month of March. And we wanted to ensure that the models that we used are still accurate in that when seeing that new data. And so we saw that it's relatively similar. So for example, for the average nurse service time and across 2 different days that we simulated, the real life observation was about 13 minutes and the simulated result was about 14 minutes. And so we're relatively close there. The last key metric was seeing that the interactions between the input models and the process mapping the system, so all the logic, was accurate. So one of those key metrics is the average time in the system. And so this includes not just what we're inputting, like the service times, but also the outputs, the wait times in the system. And so we saw that while we're kind of close here, there were some things that we need to change to ensure that the simulation is operating accurately. So we saw in those 2 days that we simulated, the real life observation was the average time in the system was about 75.5 minutes. The simulated result was just under 87. And so one of those two things, or one of those things that we noted is happening in real life, but isn't happening in the simulation that we've been trying to implement in the past couple of days. And I think we're kind of close to making to improving on that is, for example, the one-to-one assignment. So currently, a patient has one provider in the clinic, and they have one nurse in the clinic. So there's only one nurse who should be servicing them, who should be rooming them. But if a patient is waiting 30 minutes in the waiting area in real life, another nurse might step in, cover for the other nurse and room that patient. So even though there's a one-to-one assignment between patient and nurse, in real life that's kind of flexible, right? It can be bent a little bit. In our simulation, that rule can't be bent. And so we might have a patient in our simulation who's waiting 45 minutes in the waiting area because their nurse isn't available to room them, even if other nurses are free. And so that was one thing that we kind of wanted to address in changing our simulation to improve it and to improve these sorts of metrics and ensure validity of the simulation for future use. And so I think that's something that we've been working on in recent weeks, or in the past week.
So moving forward, we want to look at some what-if analysis. And so using the simulation model, we realized that there's different things that we could test in order to improve efficiency in the clinic. The first would be preceptor assignment. So right now, each preceptor is assigned a resident from the beginning of the day. And so when they go in, they have to wait for that specific preceptor. Changing the queue in the preceptor room to go from assigned to first come, first serve would help alleviate some of the waiting times that is spent in the preceptor waiting room. Another is a stacking constraint. We understand that each resident is able to stack up to a certain amount of patients. But let's say if they're stacking a third year stacking up to 4, right? And at the 2 patient mark, a preceptor is available. For them to be able to go in and use that available open time at the preceptor would help alleviate some of the preceptor waiting time as well. The next was the rooming policy. From the time studies that we did, if we were able to put all the first year residents in pod 4 closest to the preceptor room, we'd be able to reduce the time spent walking one way 60%. And the last was the new appointment waiting lengths. We know that Emory has the 20 to 40 minute appointment lengths based off of like preset times. But if we were better able to match some of the appointments to the waiting times, we also believe that some of the waiting times would be reduced. So some of our key deliverables, obviously to start with, the validated simulation model, and the next would be the random scheduling generator. And so with that, you guys would be able to go in and be able to generate schedules from the distributions from our data analysis and be able to predict different wait times throughout the day. And so from our distributions, let's say you want to go in on a Thursday morning when there's no preceptors because they're all at didactics, you'd be able to see what the queue would be then versus a Tuesday afternoon or a Monday morning or anything like that. And the last would be some data-driven insights. So with kind of our analysis, we want to be able to show what the holdup is in the clinic itself, whether it be different appointment times, different sex, age, and things like that. And so our project value stems to help improve patient satisfaction. If, let's say you go into the doctor and you're in pain and you're waiting for a long time in the waiting room because of a queuing issue, we want to be able to get these patients serviced as fast as possible. And so the faster they spend in the system, the happier that they would be. Another thing was an improved quality of care. Let's say a first year's backed up and they need to go from one patient to another without being able to check up on, I guess, when they come in. With them having less time to be able to stress, we think that would also improve quality of care a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. And I know that there are a lot of questions just waiting to get answered. So let's get started. So what made you decide to implement simulation in the first place for this particular problem?
I can take that one if you want. We specifically wanted I know typically you're using simulation as a solution to a problem, but in this case, I really wanted to demonstrate how we could use simulation at Emory Healthcare. We don't have a lot of people that have used it, and as we're working with our primary care group, they were anxious to see. So this was really more of a demonstration to start with. And then we knew that this was a good application because there was a need to try to identify how we could optimize the resident scheduling. So this was really step one of that. Step one was just to get the flow documented in a simulation model, show the clinicians and various providers how simulation worked and how we could use it to try some what if analysis. And the team did a great job with that. Our next step will be now to take that and go to using that simulation to actually optimize the scheduling of procedures to various residents so that they can see all the procedures that they are supposed to see in order to get qualified or certified.
Awesome. That's great. And it sounds like there's definitely also some insight on potential future applications of this particular problem, which is great because that just means that you can build on top of that and really see a lot of various use cases for this. So that's wonderful. So let's go over to the next one. Okay. So this might be a little bit more specific to the modeling side. So how are patient treatments modeled? Does it vary based on the patient's reason for the visit? So depending on what they're coming in for.
Absolutely. So on the back end of the simulation, the way that we have it all set up is we have a bunch of different data tables that we're inputting in. And so from the reporting, you may remember that we had that pre-processing transformation that we played in the Jupyter Notebook, and then we inputted those tables in. And so when we input those tables into simulation, that essentially contains all the patient data that's coming in. And so that includes what type of appointment they have, what their reason for the visit is, and entirely. And so within our input models itself, we have different distributions for each different for different treatments and all the different things that can vary throughout an appointment. And so that's primarily how we're modeling the different patient treatments. And then in our source itself, when we assign our state assignments, we're assigning the row to what that patient is. And so they'll get assigned to whatever reason that the patient is there for.
Awesome. That sounds great. So let's go over to the next one. So sticking to patient arrival and kind of how they're modeling, et cetera. So they come in, they know what kind of treatment they're supposed to get. How do they get assigned to a provider? Are there specific rules given the resident's experience?
Yeah, so this is something that I think Dr. Jordan touched on that is going to be implemented in future projects. But right now, currently, since we already have the data on which residents are getting assigned to patients, we're kind of working on that. But another really important aspect within the Emory system is that they have a resident checklist. And so within their checklist, each resident has to fulfill a certain amount of appointments. And so that's Emory has staff on the back end that actually writes out the schedule every single day for which provider takes which patient. And so I think this is something that can easily be implemented in future models when we have a little more clarity on exactly what those resident guidelines are. But for right now, the current model doesn't take into assigning provider to patient depending on any specific rules. It's simply just one-to-one assigns based on the schedule that was created in the beginning of the day.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. That definitely adds a lot of information as well to all the back end of all this process. So the patients are not assigned based on the experience of the residents, but obviously the resident experience is something that's then taken into consideration with other aspects of the model. So how are the different experience levels modeled? Did you create resource instances, like different objects per tier, or is that information stored and then referenced?
Yeah, absolutely. So we ended up creating 4 different objects for each tier of, I guess, of how far along a resident is within their residency or if it's a provider. And so, as I mentioned, within our input models, when we're actually doing our data analysis itself, we segmented on the different experience levels. And when we created our distributions that we actually inputted into Simio, we made sure to segment on the level of experience. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to model a Medicare appointment. There's going to be different distributions for a first year resident taking a Medicare appointment than a second year resident or a third year resident. And so there's different distributions that are all in our backend in the data tables within Simio. And so when we actually when we do those state assignments at the beginning in the source, the data table is indexed, and so we're able to find what the year of resident that the patient has, and then those will be linked to whatever distributions that we have on the back end.
Okay, that's great. And clearly, it seems like the use of data tables is also helpful with all of these different pieces of information. So I'm sure that that's super insightful also for other people to understand how to connect a lot of pieces of information together. So that's great. So plenty of other questions coming in. Okay, so when considering constraints other than resident experience, did you consider, for example, the facilities layout or the nurses slash the CANs as shared resources when creating the model?
So, as it pertains to the facilities layout, I think one of the main goals that we had when creating the simulation was to try and mirror it as close to the floor map of Dunwoody's floor plan as close as possible. And also, I think in regards to that, when we're able to create a validated simulation, it can also work as a proof of concept for other facilities that Emory has, other clinics across Georgia that can also use the simulation. As it pertains to shared resources, I think that's one of the things that we mentioned is a limitation within our current model, because right now we have one-to-one mapping on every single patient to every single resource. And I think that is where the difference is, because in real life, there is, if a patient is waiting a really long time, that one-to-one mapping may not hold true. Maybe another nurse will take on a patient if they see that another nurse is getting backlogged. And so I think that's one thing that we can create as a further improvement for future models.
And as far as the layout, the original plan was to actually include the CAD/CAM drawing of the clinic. We had some issues getting the right form memory side, but I think that's something we're going to also do going forward. But it was interesting that if you notice in the presentation, one of the recommendations the team made to move the first year residents who have to check in with a preceptor after each visit to the pod that was closest to the preceptor office, which sounds completely, obvious in hindsight, but it's something that the leaders of the clinic were really happy to see, because they're like, we see it every day and we just never thought about that. So basic solution, but that is one big thing that came from the study of the layout. So.
Yeah. And I remember in some conversations that we even had discussing the speed at which people move and the distances between was something that we had briefly talked about to consider. And it sounds like maybe with the future projects or future work, that might be an added layer on top of everything else. So that's great. Okay, let's see what other questions are coming in. Okay. So what were then other clinic variables that you were able to adjust throughout the analysis? And what were the different aspects, let's say, that you were considering when testing those different possibilities or finding your different solutions?
Absolutely. So if you recall to the scenarios testing slide, so there were a bunch of different scenarios that we tested throughout our simulation. And so one of which that we mentioned was the changing of preceptor assignment. And so that is one of the clinical variables that I think can easily be changed. And so right now, on average, there's about 1 to 3 preceptors on duty. And so one of the things that we noted is when we change the preceptor assignment to instead of 1-to-1, so each preceptor getting mapped to one provider, if we just changed it to first come, first serve, so whichever provider comes to the preceptor, they're just instantly going to the preceptor. We noticed that that specific change itself was able to reduce wait times within that specific part of the system by 31%. And so that was a really big uh, variable that we were able to change. I think the other ones that we also mentioned, the stacking constraints, changing how far and how frequently residents are actually able to stack, and seeing if we can optimize exactly when residents are able to go to the preceptor. As Dr. Jordan just mentioned, the rooming policy. So one of the time studies that we did was finding how long it takes from each exam room to the preceptor's office itself. And so one thing that we found was that first year residents are constantly getting backlogged at the preceptor's office through the simulation. And so one of the solutions that we implemented, the first year pods, the travel time between the difference between a first year at pod 4 and a first year at pod 1 was like 2 minutes. And I think throughout the day that adds up. And so that's one of the things that we noticed, that we could actually reduce that by around 60% if we were to just move the first years to pod 4. And then, yeah, I think those are the main scenarios that we primarily aim to test. And then obviously the last one was the currently Emory has 2 set appointment types. So when you schedule an appointment with Emory on my chart, you're either getting blocked into a 20-minute appointment or a 40-minute appointment. And we thought that through some deeper data analysis, that we can suggest more time slots that can better allocate more appointments. Because a lot of times these 40-minute appointments may not actually take 40 minutes. They might take 10 minutes. And so that creates a little bit of difference on. So if we can be a little bit more specific on suggesting what the different appointment types would be. So I think those are the main variables that we aim to adjust.
Oh, awesome. That sounds like a lot of different pieces moving in, but it sounds also like you're getting then really useful results that you're then able to communicate over, which I think will tie well with the other questions that have come from the audience. I see there's a different question here. So when modeling and all these different process components coming in, what were there emergencies or other deviations from your process map? And how many routes can patients take if they need additional procedures such as scans or tests?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main things that we had within our process map was that additional care. And so that primarily entails vaccines, pregnancy tests, and urine tests, blood work. I think that additional care segment within our process mapping, and we also have that within our simulation, kind of is meant to encompass all of that into one. And I think in that sense, within the electronic health record, there's actually data on whether or not the patient actually had the additional care or not. We ended up within our facility layout, there's a POC lab right above one of the exam rooms. And so if the patient deemed to have any additional care, regardless of what additional procedure it would be, whether it be a pregnancy test or vaccine, we ended up routing the patient and the nurse that's mapped to the patient to that POC lab to provide that additional care. And so I think that's how we have it currently modeled. I think for future implementation, I think we could be a little bit more specific. And if there's data on every single additional process, I think it can be a bit more granular in that sense. But for right now, we kind of clump them all into one and have them route to the POC lab.
Yeah. Sometimes that's also the best way to start modeling, is kind of beginning with that more grouped up or higher level view, and then as you go on, adding that information through data or things like that, which is a great obviously a great model approach that we try to promote a lot. So that's great. So let's see what the next question is. Okay, so kind of going back before to when discussing sort of the results that you were already seeing, especially when modifying some of the features. So how were these results communicated to the clinical staff? How are they involved at all in this project and in the model building process?
Absolutely. I'll start with the second part of the question because I think that leads to the first part. Emory's been a massive help. I don't think we would be able to complete this project without their assistance. Dontavius on my left, I don't provided us with a resource to meet with you, Kiara, as well. Like, I think Emory was very accommodating. Whenever we needed data, we were very quick to get it, and I think there was a very fluid collaboration between both parts where especially in understanding the system because it is a very unique system in the sense that there's this preceptor resident interaction that needs to be modeled, and I think having constant conversations with different clinical staff, trying to understand exactly how things are moving within the clinic, I think those interactions definitely helped out in understanding exactly the best way that we can model it. And so definitely, I think it was a full team collaboration between Tech and Emory in the sense that we were able to understand everything in that sense. And then how we were able to communicate the results. As mentioned, I think one of the limitations within our model is that the model isn't fully validated yet. I think it's we have like we like to call it face validity, and we're able to make recommendations on that face validity of the model. And so recently we presented to we went in person and presented at Emory's headquarters, and we were able to sit down and talk with the team and just spoke about the model and what the different results and things that we saw within that. And so I think that was the main way that we communicated our results.
Teamwork makes the dream work. There we go. That's that.
Exactly.
Got caught in my own words, but that sounds great. So for the next question is, so you mentioned that there's potential for future growth or future use of this model or similar applications. Would you mind diving a little bit deeper into how you see this model possibly support modeling of other departments in the healthcare facility or other aspects within the same facility, for example?
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, I can take this one. Two ways. One, to further use it in the Dunwoody clinic because it is a special clinic since it's resident run. As we talked about before, to optimize the resident scheduling. That's the next step with that clinic. But then sharing this across our primary care leadership so that they can see in other areas. We have over 300 clinics across the Atlanta area. And so we're looking for how we can use similar modeling to optimize patient flow and resource usage in those as well.
Awesome. That sounds great. So for our next question, which I think this will tie also pretty well with what we just sort of talked about when it comes to, future development, et cetera. Is this something that might, involve the collaboration with other students, or how common is it for students to collaborate on projects in these type of commercial applications?
I think it's pretty common based on what I've seen through the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. But we at Emory have a partnership with Georgia Tech. So we can do unlimited number of projects with the students that are finishing their capstone projects in industrial engineering. I know Auburn University does several of those, Kennesaw State, several of the universities around us we've worked with on various projects. Because we're located here in Atlanta, we've recently had two different teams from Georgia Tech, this one being the only one doing simulation. But Simio has been great to partner with us to make sure that the students have the same kind of system, so what they worked on was translatable and we would be able to pick right up where they left off. And so that's why we've put in for another project next year to this next fall to take this model and expand it. In fact, Manny just graduated a few weeks ago. So congratulations to him with an undergrad in industrial and systems engineering, right, Manny? Yes, and I think he's looking for a job still?
Yep, still looking.
Amazing. Maybe you can message some people here. Well, congratulations on graduating. And that definitely, also highlights information that the use of collaboration, let's say, between academic and then commercial and then translation then into the real life applications from learning of Simio in an academic setting. And so we know, or I know as well, from talking to other students and other projects, that it is a growing sort of collaboration effort between Simio and other businesses, and that we fully support and try to promote, support both sides as much as possible throughout it. So it's great that there's still projects that are ongoing and developing.
Yeah, I think if there are people listening in that work in industry and are wondering how they can get access to students to help with this, I would reach out to your local or regional university that has an industrial systems engineering department, because every ISE department does what they call a capstone project. So the very last semester, usually of the students' curriculum is spent doing some kind of real world application, and many of them are really interested in using Simio and doing some kind of simulation. So that would be a recommendation.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, us on our side as well, we support all aspects of this specific collaboration. So helping with the model development and understanding sort of how to then be able to leverage what you've learned in that real world problem. So that's great that that's happening on your side as well, and that you've seen success doing it. So amazing. So I know there's a few more questions and we still have a little bit of time, so I think we can get through these. But throughout the model development, what kind of drawbacks did the team face when going through this project? There's some real life situations that might not be able to be modeled in Simio. So what were any issues that you did see?
Yeah, I think the main complexity within the model that we were kind of struggling to implement was the nuance that occurs in the clinic every single day. I think one of the things that we noticed when we went into the clinic was that although there is a set schedule, a lot of times it's not followed to a T. There's always something different happening, whether it be maybe another preceptor takes on a provider if a preceptor is super clogged, or if a different nurse takes on a different a patient that they're not exactly mapped to. I think that nuance within in real life that's kind of difficult to be modeled in itself. I think that was one of the things that we were struggling to actually model in Simio itself. I think that's something that I still have questions to. And I think there's like a dynamic landscape when, as like, if you were to go from like a first year resident, like a year from now, if you were to use the same model, that resident now is a second year, and so they're constantly evolving, but that's not exactly getting picked up in the model. And I think that to actually pick that up would require a lot more complexity within the model that we're exactly not sure how to do. So I think that was another potential drawback that we faced. And then I think those are the main issues that we faced. I think also figuring out the routing and logic was a bit of a struggle. I think our team kind of came up with the innovative solution. I'm sure if we talked it through with Kiara, she would probably find a much easier solution. But the way that we ended up doing our routing and our state assignments is essentially we created each row in our data table was essentially a new like a different entity. So I guess in the sense, like, one row could be a fourth year provider doing a Medicare appointment. Another row could be a third year provider. And so each row was kind of different. And so the way that we ended up setting up our state assignments is that we just indexed the table. I'm sure through some add-on process, there's probably an easier way to actually assign the variables. But I think that was one of the ways that we were actually able to do it, but just unnecessary complexity. But aside from that, I think the project went pretty smoothly.
That's great. And there's so many different ways to model everything. There's no one right answer to do anything. So if that's what works right now and that's what works in the current system, that's wonderful. And then obviously future opportunities to maybe reevaluate or reexamine are always there, but it's great that you were able to find a solution for that. I think we have time for one more question. So here we go. So how do you protect your investment to ensure that the output of the project proposes a genuine recommendation that passes V&V and are at the expected sort of caliber? So making sure that the solution or the answers or the proposed solutions that you provide are ones that they can actually implement in real life.
Well,
Yeah,
this was
sorry.
done in a vacuum by just the students. This was a very interactive work with the stakeholders. So the stakeholders were involved at every step along the way. We got regular updates from the team on where they were, first of all, on what the objective was and making sure we were really clear on the charter and the mission. And then as we went along, we touched base. We also had Dontavius, who's one of our healthcare systems engineers at Emory, work very closely with the team. So I think it was more of just ongoing communication, stakeholder involvement, and just continuous discussion.
Awesome. That's great. Well,
I was asking if Manny wanted to add anything, or Dontavius.
From my point of view, I think it was a bit of confirmation of verification for the students when you have, some of our executives saying that, we see these things every day. Like, oh, we were thinking those same things, but now we have a way to prove it. So, just having that confirmation from them who do the work on a regular basis was definitely give us that check mark saying, okay, this was value added, not just for the students, but for the business as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for presenting and answering all of these questions. I'm sure a lot of people found this super insightful and all of their applications very helpful. If there's anyone in the audience that has any other questions on that collaboration between commercial applications and the academic side, there's the email for our academic program below. So please feel free to reach out there. But thank you very much, and we'll see everyone on the next presentation.